Welcome to Hopped Up on Security. This is a show where we talk a little bit about beer and a lot about security. And today I'm joined by Tomer Schwartz. Tomer, welcome.
Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for coming. Are you a beer drinker?
I
think you said recently that you are a beer drinker. I brought a really great beer today for us to try. This is, it's called Bookie Jack. It's from a brewery called Firestone Walker in Paso Robles, California. It's actually one of my favorite styles, black IPA. This is particularly unique in that it's a black rye IPA, so it's got a little bit of that rye spice. But I love the black IPAs, or what they call the Cascadian dark ales, because they're nice and roasty and flavorful. They're not just hoppy like a lot of the IPAs, the West Coast IPAs. So let's give it a pour and give it a taste. Okay. All right, a little bit there. I always like to put a little head on it. Shows that we have a nice healthy beer. Yeah, it's quite a bit of head, isn't it? We'll let that settle down a little bit. I think you're getting more than I am. I'll go ahead and finish that off there. Let that settle down. But yeah, let's maybe give it a sniff while it's while the head's kind of coming down. But you can smell get some of the hops and.
Yeah, very hoppy.
But I mean, a nice head means it's going to be a healthy beer. So we'll let it settle down a little bit. So Tomer, I know that you're a security guy, right? You do stuff.
I do
Stuff in the cloud.
I do stuff
In the cloud.
in the cloud.
Security is a big topic, and I know there are a number of different ways that companies or people can be breached. And I'd love to talk about a little bit about some of the things that you're aware of and some of the things that you're seeing. I know you're a researcher, and you're out there looking at different ways that apps are vulnerable, and the way that people are really taking advantage of some of the shortcomings or the vulnerabilities of applications. What are you seeing out there? How are the bad guys getting in, so to speak?
It ranges from a variety of different attack vectors. And it can be as complex as a zero-day vulnerability being abused or exploited, up to very simple phishing campaigns that have gotten a lot of traction recently, actually.
Yeah.
So, for example, I had an interesting conversation yesterday with a friend. Was actually very surprised to find out that two-factor authentication is not the silver bullet.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think, I've got my normal authentication, my username and password, but if I have a token, the second form of authentication, it's very hard to kind of replicate that, right? So
yeah.
I think a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear that two-factor authentication actually isn't as I guess safe, or doesn't give you that level of security a lot of people assume. So tell me a little bit more about what you
Yeah, so actually two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication in general is a very good security solution, but it's not a silver bullet. That's the difference.
Gotcha.
So what happens is that just as the attacker serves a phishing page to the user, he can serve the second page now asking for the second token.
So they basically grab not only the original credentials, username and password, but they're also able to get that token as well.
Correct.
Oh, interesting. And pass that. Well, what are they doing next? What's the next step in the process?
So it's kind of different between a usual, let's say, offline phishing attack, because they can't store the username, password, and the two-factor authentication code for later. They have to do it in real time.
That token, it has a lifespan of maybe 30 seconds to up to a minute, right? I mean, maximum of a minute. So you've got to use it very quickly.
Yeah, so they have to have some kind of script code. And I'm sorry for not mentioning it earlier, but kids, don't try this at home. They have to have some kind of script that automates this process. Because, for example, some two-factor authentication schemes works by you logging in, for example, to your single sign-on provider or for Google, and then you get a text message with the code.
Right.
So if I serve you a phishing page, for example, and you input your username and password, and then I ask you to input the code, but you get it via text message, and you don't get it, then what are you giving me back? So I have to do everything in real time in the back end. So I get to have some kind of script code running and basically doing a man-in-the-middle attack over the entire authentication scheme.
So Tomer, I know a lot of people think that two-factor authentication is is very safe and helps keep you protected, but it sounds like there are some vulnerabilities we need to be aware of. What are some things that people can do, or customers can do, to stay protected with this in mind, that two-factor isn't an end-all be-all for security?
So you have to make sure that you have some kind of way to identify the identity of the server.
Okay.
So SSL works great in that sense. You can actually verify the certificate and to make sure that the URL is right and the page is being served from the correct server. But in some cases, even that is not enough, because you can think about some kinds of attacks where you are being redirected back to your single sign-on server, which redirects you using the authentication token back to the attack server. So basically, even though they didn't gain the credentials, they did have access to your identity.
Got it. So there's a lot we can do on the solution side or on the front end side to help keep things protected, to make sure that our users are aware that they're either accessing a vulnerable site or a phishing site or an actual legitimate site. But it sounds like user education is really important as well, right?
It
so
is.
Users need to be aware of what to look for, the mechanisms to look for, the telltale signs to look for to see if they're actually visiting a valid site or a malware site or a phishing site.
Definitely. Sometimes it's actual vulnerabilities. It can be some ways to bypass authentication entirely. And it depends on the quality of the code of the provider and of all of the software being used in the back end. So sometimes it's software that is being installed by the provider by themselves without any consent. And on other cases, it's basically third-party software that the user installs.
Yeah.
So you do have some ways to make sure that your environment is being hardened and raising its overall security.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big problem.
It's a big problem. Great. Thanks a lot for that explanation. It's, I think it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of people. A lot of people, again, think that two-factor authentication is sort of the end-all, be-all from an authentication standpoint, but it doesn't necessarily protect you 100% of the time. So, you need to put other mechanisms in place, and you need to make sure that your users are aware of what they're clicking on and where they're going. Well, thanks again, Tomer, for joining us today. Do you want to take one more sip of your beer and,
Yeah, sure.
and give me your thoughts? See what you think. You get that? I know
Very
you're
hoppy.
It is very hoppy.
Yeah.
And the thing I like about these black IPAs or the CDAs is that they have that balance of the roastiness from the roasty malts.
Yeah.
That kind of balance against the hoppiness. So for me, these are great beers.
Yeah, very bitter, partially smoky,
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks, Tomer, for joining us. Really appreciate it. We look forward to having you back again for another beer and another conversation around security.
I'd love that.
And with that, let's hopped up on security. Thanks again for coming. We look forward
Thank
to
you.
seeing you next time. All right, cheers.